Marriage is not a must. If you are not comfortable or happy with the person you're with, you can end it before you say, "I do." Contentment is a gift everyone should have. It was supposed to be the happiest day of his life. But everything changed when he found out the truth about his wife. What started as a wedding celebration ended in chaos, betrayal, and a tragic death. But was it all really a mistake, or was it something more? Have you ever ignored the signs of betrayal, hoping it was just a phase? Would you have reacted differently if it was your best friend and your wife? This isn't just a story about a man discovering an affair. It's about a friendship that cracked under pressure, a woman who wanted more than love, and a man who thought he had everything. Slipped away. And bringing daily told and untold true crime stories update. Please don't forget a man who believed in shortcuts. At 32 years old, he had worked tirelessly to build a life for himself and the woman he loved, all while living a life of humble means. By day, he worked long hours as an Uber driver, shuttling people around the city, making just enough to scrape by. There was no glamour in it, no high-status rewards, but it was honest work, and that was enough for him. For Tyrone, the dream wasn't to be rich or famous. It was much simpler. He just wanted to give his fiancée, Vanessa, the life she deserved, the life he had always imagined they could build together, based on love and hard work. Born and raised in the same neighborhood, Tyrone had seen what street life could do to a person. His older brother, John, had been caught up in the allure of fast money, drugs, and danger. That life, though it seemed to offer everything, took John from him. It was a loss Tyrone couldn't shake. The death of his brother served as a painful reminder of the cost of chasing easy wealth, and he swore never to follow that same path. Tyrone's loyalty, his determination to rise above, and his work ethic were all born from the tragedies that had shaped his life. He had seen too many good men fall, too many friends who had lost their way, and he swore to never make the same mistake. Though Tyrone's life wasn't glamorous, he wasn't bitter. His genuine love for Vanessa kept him motivated. He believed that if he just kept pushing, just kept working hard enough, he could make something of their lives, despite the odds stacked against them. He saw the good in people, in Vanessa, and he trusted her more than he trusted anyone else. It wasn't perfect, but to him, it was enough. Tyrone's personality reflected that same humility. He was the type of man who would go out of his way to make sure those around him felt heard and cared for. He wasn't a man who asked for much. He didn't need extravagant gestures or flashy displays of affection. He loved with his actions, working hard, staying loyal, and doing everything he could to provide for the woman he loved. But Tyrone had no idea that in the heart of the woman he trusted most, his world was already beginning to crack apart. Michael Harris was everything.
Do you know the U.S.
Not. While Tyrone worked hard to make an honest living, Michael had always lived a life of excess. From a young age, Michael had been drawn to the streets. Drugs, money, power. He craved it all. Unlike Tyrone, who had struggled to rise above the poverty he was born into, Michael had embraced the fast, dangerous lifestyle that came with street deals and shady business. The money was easy, the power intoxicating. And with the wealth he had accumulated, Michael believed that anything was his for the taking. Michael had always been Tyrone's best friend, but the gap between them had grown wider with time. Tyrone, with his good intentions and hard work, represented everything Michael could never understand. Michael didn't see Tyrone's humble work ethic as something to admire. He saw it as weakness. In Michael's eyes, Tyrone was just another man who couldn't see that wealth, power and status were the only things that truly mattered. Tyrone's rejection of Michael's lifestyle only made him feel superior, and he looked down on his best friend, even while pretending to be his ally. But behind the act of friendship, Michael had his eyes on something Tyrone had: Vanessa. To Michael, she was an ideal prize, a beautiful woman whose love for Tyrone had blinded her to the wealth and luxury he could offer. Michael had tried, countless times, to charm Vanessa, to lure her into his world of fast cars, expensive dinners, and carefree living. But Vanessa had resisted. Michael wasn't the kind of man who took no for an answer. He had everything in life that Tyrone didn't, and he wanted to prove it. He saw Vanessa as a prize, a conquest, and he didn't care who he had to hurt to get her. His charisma and wealth made him untouchable in his own mind. He believed that Tyrone, the hard-working Uber driver, was beneath him. And if he couldn't have the woman he wanted by charm alone, he was willing to do whatever it took to make her his. Michael's manipulative nature and his disregard for boundaries were a dangerous combination. His friendship with Tyrone, once solid, was beginning to fracture. And as Vanessa grew closer to Michael, she unknowingly helped destroy the very foundation of their friendship. Michael, now not just a friend but a predator, was ready to make his move. Vanessa Williams had always dreamed of a life that felt larger than life. She wasn't just after comfort. She longed for extravagance, for a world that sparkled with wealth, luxury, and status. A world far removed from the modest life she had known. Growing up, she imagined herself in a lavish home, attending high society parties and being admired by all. But the reality of her life was something else entirely. Her relationship with Tyrone, a hard-working Uber driver, was comfortable and stable, but it wasn't glamorous. Deep down, Vanessa felt a growing sense of dissatisfaction with the simple, unremarkable life they were building together. When Vanessa met Tyrone, she had already started to settle. She thought maybe stability could be enough. Maybe his unwavering reliability could be enough to fill the void she had carried with her. He was everything that many people would wish for: caring, dependable, and hard-working. He offered her the security she needed after years of uncertainty. But there was one problem. Tyrone's world, his modest dreams, were not the ones she had envisioned. Despite his best efforts, Tyrone simply couldn't provide the kind of life Vanessa had always craved. As time passed, the realization sank in. Love and stability weren't enough to feed her hunger for something more. She wanted the luxury, the excitement, and the thrill that came with money, status, and a life of ease. Her relationship with Tyrone at first had seemed like the perfect escape from a past filled with uncertainty. But as she settled deeper into their life together, the weight of her own unfulfilled dreams began to press down on her. She was not unhappy with Tyrone, but she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that the life they were building wasn't the one she truly desired. Tyrone's hard work and modest income, while respectable, were no match for the grand vision she had for herself. She wanted more. She wanted a life filled with the kind of luxury she had once dreamed about. A life where the spotlight was on her, where she could walk into rooms that turned heads and be treated like royalty. Tyrone couldn't give her that. He couldn't change the fact that he was a man of humble means, someone who worked hard, but didn't have the kind of wealth or status that could elevate her to the life she envisioned. Vanessa's true motivations were tangled in a web of desires that went beyond just a happy life with Tyrone. She loved him, yes, but she knew deep down that her heart wasn't entirely his. Her affection for him had always been rooted in the stability he offered, not the passion or excitement she secretly craved. What she really wanted was the wealth, the luxury, and the high life that people like Michael Harris lived. One warm evening after a long day's work, Tyrone took Vanessa out to dinner at a modest but cozy restaurant they both loved. It was a place they frequented, a quiet corner where the staff knew them by name. Tyrone had planned it for weeks, making sure everything was perfect. Over dessert, he turned to Vanessa, his heart full of hope and anticipation, and asked,
"Stop scrolling if your smile is suffering."
"Will you marry me?" Vanessa froze for a moment, taken aback by the simplicity of the moment. She had always imagined a grander proposal, a proposal that mirrored the kind of life she wanted to live, grand, extravagant, and full of excitement. But here she was, in a small restaurant with a modest ring, asked to make a commitment that she wasn't sure she was ready to make. She hesitated. Tyrone, eager and hopeful, took her hand. "I've always known you were the one, Vanessa. This is what we've worked for, right? A future together." Vanessa's smile was warm, but there was something cold in her heart that she didn't know how to explain. She didn't want to hurt Tyrone. She loved him in her own way, but she also knew that deep down, her heart wasn't fully in it. Tyrone had no idea that her dissatisfaction with their life had been growing for months. Her longing for something more had become unbearable. But how could she say no to this man, the man who had always been there for her, the man who believed in their future together? "I will," Vanessa said, her voice soft, masking the turmoil within her. The words came out, but they didn't carry the weight of passion that one might expect on such an important day. Tyrone, oblivious to the conflict in her heart, smiled with relief and joy, completely unaware of the cracks that were beginning to show in their relationship. As Tyrone moved ahead with wedding preparations, unaware of Vanessa's growing discontent, she began to vocalize what had been bubbling up inside her for months. One day, as they were sitting together, talking about the upcoming wedding and how they would make it work, Vanessa's words were more revealing than she realized. "You know," she said, laughing lightly, "maybe you should think about joining Michael's business. You know, get into the game. He's making so much money, and things could really change for us if you did." Tyrone looked at her, confused. "What do you mean, baby? You know how I feel about that. I've worked hard to stay away from that life. I don't want any part of it." Vanessa smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Yeah, I know. I just thought it might make things easier for us, you know? We could have everything we want. More than enough. You could be as successful as Michael. You could be someone." The words hung in the air. Tyrone, still unable to read the full weight of her suggestion, shrugged it off. "I don't need all that to be happy, Vanessa. I just want us to have a life together." But Vanessa's mind was elsewhere, spinning with the thought of wealth, luxury, and status. She wanted more than what Tyrone could offer. She wanted the life that Michael had, a life of ease, where everything came effortlessly. Her words had been casual, but they revealed her discontent with their modest lifestyle. She wasn't truly satisfied with the simple life Tyrone could provide. She dreamed of a life filled with glamour, and Michael was the key to making that dream a reality. Meanwhile, Michael's attempts to get closer to Vanessa had not gone unnoticed, even though Tyrone remained oblivious. Michael had always been the type of man who took what he wanted, and Vanessa had become the latest object of his desire. Michael, as Tyrone's best friend, had always been part of their lives, but he wasn't the kind of man who could just sit back and let things unfold on their own terms. He saw in Vanessa not just the woman Tyrone loved, but a way to get something more, a way to prove his superiority. While Tyrone worked long hours, Michael lived a life of ease, his pockets always full, and his world always sparkling with wealth. He began to gradually but persistently woo Vanessa. He knew what she wanted, even if she wasn't fully aware of it herself. He bought her gifts, expensive designer items that made her feel special, even if just for a moment. He invited her to parties she would have never attended otherwise, throwing her into a world she hadn't yet seen firsthand. The glitzy events, the powerful people, they were intoxicating to her, and Michael was always at the center of it all. He would flatter her, making her feel like the center of attention, gradually planting the idea that she deserved more. She deserved someone like him. Michael knew how to play the game. He could see the cracks in Vanessa's relationship with Tyrone before Tyrone even realized they were there. He wasn't just offering her a lavish lifestyle. He was offering her a taste of freedom, a life where she didn't have to settle for less. Every gift, every compliment, every flirtatious comment was a step toward his goal, to make Vanessa realize that she could do better than Tyrone. And Vanessa, though she didn't fall for his advances, she kept rejecting him. But Michael's attention was flattering, and his lifestyle was everything she had ever dreamed of. If you were in Vanessa's position, would you tell your man that his best friend was trying to get closer to you? Would you have been honest with him, or would you have kept it a secret to avoid conflict? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. The tension between the life she had and the life she dreamed of was growing unbearable. And as her wedding day drew nearer, so too did the inevitable choice that Vanessa would have to make. Would she choose the life that Tyrone had worked so hard to provide? Or would she succumb to the new life with Michael, one filled with luxury and excitement? Everything was about to change, and no one, especially Tyrone, could see it coming. As the months rolled by and the wedding just 3 months away, the pressure on Vanessa to make her dream wedding a reality.
What's your credit card?
Overwhelming. The idea of a modest, simple celebration was never in her mind. She had envisioned this day for years, something extravagant, something her friends would envy. She wasn't content with a quiet ceremony. She wanted her wedding to be a statement. She wanted her guests to remember it as the event of the year. The problem? Tyrone's modest income could only stretch so far. No matter how hard he worked, it wasn't enough to fund the dream wedding Vanessa had pictured in her mind. She needed more, and she needed it fast. One evening, as they sat together at their small kitchen table, Vanessa brought up the subject of finances once again. She had already talked to Tyrone about their wedding plans, and though he tried his best to budget, his options were limited. As Tyrone explained the reality of their situation, Vanessa's mind was already racing with ideas. She needed more than what he could offer, and she knew exactly where to turn. "Baby, I've been thinking," Vanessa began, her voice soft but purposeful. "What if I ask Michael for help? He's always had a lot of money, and you know he's our friend. Maybe he could help cover some of the costs. It would mean so much to me, and to you too." Tyrone's face hardened immediately, his instincts flaring. He knew all too well that Michael's wealth didn't come from hard work and sweat. It came from deals that no one ever spoke about, from dangerous, shady enterprises. Tyrone had made it clear to Vanessa before that he wanted nothing to do with Michael's lifestyle. He had already lost his older brother to the streets. He wasn't about to let Michael's influence pull him back into that world. "No, Vanessa," Tyrone replied firmly, his voice edged with concern. "I've told you before, I don't want any part of Michael's money. It's not clean. It comes with strings attached, and I don't want to get mixed up in it. We'll figure it out, but I don't want you going to him. Please." Vanessa was silent for a moment, a flicker of frustration crossing her face. Tyrone's refusal was a blow to her, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was running out of time. She needed this wedding to be perfect, to be something she could brag about to her friends. Vanessa's mind was already beginning to spiral. The thoughts of Michael's lavish lifestyle, his effortless wealth, and the opportunities it could bring her were becoming harder to ignore. She wasn't about to settle for something less than what she had imagined. Despite Tyrone's strong objections, Vanessa knew what she had to do. She had to make this wedding something unforgettable, something that would make her the center of attention. And for that, she would need more than what Tyrone could offer. She began to think about how she could make it all work. The pieces came together in her mind. Michael was the solution. Vanessa's desperation grew. She could not, and would not, let this opportunity slip by. She knew she was playing a dangerous game. But what was the worst that could happen? It was just one time, one request for help, and then everything would be perfect. The wedding would be a showstopper. Her friends would envy her. Everything would fall into place. With that resolve, Vanessa secretly met with Michael. They arranged to meet in one of the high-end restaurants Michael frequented, a place where the air was thick with wealth and the clink of expensive glassware. Vanessa walked in with a nervous heart but a determined mind. She couldn't let her dreams slip away. Michael, ever the smooth talker, was waiting for her. He greeted her with a smile that was as dangerous as it was charming. His presence made her heart race, not out of affection, but because of the power he exuded. She had always known Michael had a way of making people do what he wanted. But today, it wasn't just his words that made Vanessa uneasy. It was the reality of what she was about to agree to. "Vanessa," Michael said, his voice low and persuasive, "I can help you. You know I can. But you're going to have to do something for me too. I'll give you the money for this wedding, whatever you need, but in exchange, you'll come with me. You'll sleep with me. Just once, and I'll make sure everything's taken care of. You'll never have to worry about money again. The life you've always dreamed of." Vanessa froze. She had been prepared for a request, but this, she hadn't imagined it would come to this. Her stomach churned as the weight of the offer settled in her mind. Was she really willing to go that far for this dream? For a wedding? For a life that could be so different? She hesitated, looking away for a moment, thinking about Tyrone and the life they were building together. But as she thought about it, the allure of what Michael offered, the life of wealth and status, seemed almost irresistible. She knew it was wrong, but she also knew it would be the one thing that could give her everything she had ever wanted. "I'll do it."
All right, so
Her voice barely above a whisper. Michael smiled. "Good. We both get what we want." The affair between Vanessa and Michael, though brief, marked the beginning of a dangerous transformation in her life. She had convinced herself that it was a one-time thing, a necessary step to make her wedding dreams come true. Afterward, she would be free to go back to Tyrone, no harm done. She had the money she needed for the wedding, the extravagant, picture-perfect event she had always dreamed of. When she returned to Tyrone, she told him everything was covered. She claimed that her friends had chipped in and that her own savings had helped fill the gaps. Tyrone, blissfully unaware of what had truly transpired, smiled, relieved that the wedding was finally set to move forward without any more financial worries. Sadly, Vanessa couldn't shake the nagging guilt. She had made a deal with the devil to get what she wanted, and now there was no going back. She had promised Michael that this would remain a secret, and she had no intention of telling Tyrone the truth. She had to keep up the facade, keep pretending that everything was fine, even though her heart felt heavy with the weight of her betrayal. Why would anyone fake it for a wedding that was meant to last just one day? Why go to such lengths to impress others, to create a life that wasn't real just to show off for a few hours? Vanessa's desire for perfection had driven her to extremes, and now, with the wedding approaching, she felt the weight of her choices pressing down on her. But Vanessa didn't care. She wasn't thinking about the future. She was focused on the now. The wedding had to be the talk of the town. She wanted people to envy her, to look at her and see the woman who had everything. She wanted Tyrone's love, yes, but she also wanted a life that others would admire. The truth of what she had done to achieve that life didn't matter, not yet anyway. She knew that faking it, pretending everything was fine, was risky. But in that moment, it felt like the only option. No one cared about the truth of how she'd gotten the money. What mattered was the wedding. The grand, opulent wedding that would take her one step closer to the life she wanted. And so, the stage was set. The wedding was on the horizon, and Vanessa's secret, her dangerous, costly secret, was one step closer to being exposed. What would happen when the truth finally came out? Would Vanessa be able to hold on to her dreams, or would everything she had built crumble beneath her feet? Only time would tell. It had been a week since Vanessa had made her decision. A week since she had given herself to Michael in exchange for the money that would secure the wedding of her dreams. She had told herself it was a one-time thing, a necessary evil to make everything fall into place. But as the days went by, Vanessa began to realize something that she had ignored in the heat of the moment. When the devil gives, he doesn't stop taking. A week after their first encounter, Michael reached out to her again. This time, his message wasn't subtle or suggestive. It was direct, commanding. He made it clear that he expected more. "Come to me," he demanded in his message. "You know what I want, and you know what you promised. This isn't over." Vanessa, though hesitant and filled with guilt, couldn't bring herself to say no. She had already crossed the line once, and now she found herself caught in a web of choices she couldn't undo. Michael had already given her the money for the wedding, but now he wanted something more. Something that felt like a dark exchange for everything she had asked for. She went to him once again. Despite her earlier promises to herself and to Tyrone, despite telling herself that the first time was the last, she went back. And once again, Michael had his way with her. The affair continued, as if it was inevitable, something she couldn't control, even though she had hoped, even begged herself to walk away.
Your competitor
Left his apartment that day, feeling emptier than before, knowing she had allowed herself to be used again. But there was a part of her that didn't feel the remorse she thought she should. The wedding was still on track. She had the money, the event was coming together, and now she could finally have everything she wanted, at least on the surface. But deep down, she knew it wasn't over. Michael hadn't finished with her yet. 1 week before the wedding, just when Vanessa thought she could breathe a little easier, something happened that she had not anticipated. She began to feel a wave of nausea, her body reacting in ways it hadn't before. It started slowly at first, but then it became undeniable. She was pregnant. It wasn't the news she had planned for, but in some twisted way, it felt almost inevitable. She had been with Michael twice now, and their encounters had not been without consequence. Her mind raced. How was she going to explain this to Tyrone? How would she keep the truth hidden from him? Tyrone, excited as ever, was thrilled by the news when Vanessa told him. She waited for the right moment, a quiet evening just after dinner, when they were relaxing together. She sat him down, her heart pounding in her chest. "Tyrone," she said, her voice shaky but hopeful. I'm pregnant." Tyrone's face lit up. He was overjoyed. There was nothing he wanted more than to start a family with Vanessa. After years of working tirelessly, after all the sacrifices he had made for their future, this was the moment he had been waiting for. The dream of having a child, of raising a family, was finally becoming a reality. "Vanessa, this is the best news," he said, pulling her into a tight hug. "I've never been happier." But despite his excitement, there was a nagging thought in the back of his mind. He remembered the timing of things. The wedding had been planned for months, but the pregnancy came as a surprise. It was only a few days earlier that he had talked to Michael about their wedding preparations. In the midst of casual conversation, Tyrone had mentioned how thrilled he was that things were finally coming together. He'd mentioned that Vanessa was pregnant, and Michael had simply nodded, offering a tight smile. It was a small detail, but for some reason it stuck with Tyrone. The pregnancy, though wonderful, seemed to have come at an unexpected time. Tyrone had always been attentive to Vanessa, always the romantic. He couldn't recall any moments where they'd been especially intimate recently. Stress from the wedding planning had kept them both busy. His mind turned back to his conversation with Michael. "Michael," Tyrone said, bringing the topic up again, "Vanessa's pregnant. It's a little earlier than we expected, but, you know, I'm excited. It's a big step." Michael had smiled, but the silence that followed had felt strange. Tyrone hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now it lingered in his mind. Michael didn't say anything about the timing. He just nodded and changed the subject. After their last encounter, Michael's attempts to reach Vanessa had become more intense. He tried calling her, sending messages, but each time she either ignored his calls or left his texts unanswered. Vanessa had made it clear. She was done. She had gotten what she wanted, and now she wanted to bury the past and move forward with Tyrone. But Michael didn't see it that way. He wasn't used to being shut out, especially not by someone who had relied on him for such a significant favor. Every time he called, he could feel his frustration growing. He would sit with his phone in hand, watching the screen light up with the missed calls, the unanswered messages. But Vanessa wouldn't budge. She busied herself with wedding preparations, staying too occupied to deal with him. In the few moments they did cross paths, she kept her distance, avoiding his eyes, brushing off his attempts at conversation. It was as though the deal they had struck never happened, as if she had erased him from her life the moment the wedding was locked in. Michael didn't take rejection lightly. He had never needed to. His wealth, his charisma, and his influence were usually enough to get people to bend to his will. But Vanessa was different. She had played her part, gotten what she needed, and now she wanted to cut him off.
Did you know that you can have permanent teeth in just 24?
Ready to let her go. He couldn't. Not yet. The day that Vanessa had dreamed about for so long had finally arrived. It was supposed to be the pinnacle of her life, a celebration of love, commitment, and the beginning of a future together. Yet, as the wedding ceremony progressed, something inside her was unraveling. The day was filled with excitement, laughter, and smiles, but as she walked down the aisle to marry Tyrone, her thoughts weren't with him. They weren't on the vows she was about to make or the life she was supposed to build with him. They were with Michael, the man who had come to dominate her thoughts in the most dangerous way. Vanessa grew tired, the excitement of the day beginning to take its toll. She excused herself from the party and retreated to the quiet of their hotel room. Her heart was heavy, her mind racing. The wedding, the lies and the secrets had begun to weigh down on her. She needed space, a moment to herself before she rejoined the celebration. Meanwhile, Tyrone, oblivious to the turmoil inside his wife, stayed downstairs with his best friend, Michael, and other of his friends. The men had been close for years, and now, as Tyrone was about to step into this new chapter of his life, Michael was there, cracking jokes and reminding him of the carefree bachelor days he has left behind. They laughed, shared stories, and enjoyed the final moments of their friendship before Tyrone became a married man. Michael, however, was distracted. His thoughts kept returning to Vanessa, who had retreated upstairs alone. He had tried reaching out to her throughout the day, texts, calls, but Vanessa wasn't responding. The unease inside him grew. He had always been able to control situations, to get what he wanted. But this, Vanessa avoiding him, was something he wasn't willing to accept. He needed answers. Without warning, Michael stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. Tyrone looked up, unaware of the storm approaching. "I'll be right back," Michael muttered, his eyes already fixed on the door leading upstairs. Tyrone barely registered his friend's departure, too busy in the haze of his wedding euphoria. Michael walked up the stairs, his steps growing more deliberate with each one. When he reached the door to Vanessa and Tyrone's room, he paused, knocking firmly, his frustration boiling. Vanessa, already feeling the tension building, opened the door tiredly. "What is it, Michael?" she asked, her voice a mixture of exhaustion and forced calm. Without waiting for her to step aside, Michael pushed the door open slightly further. "I've been trying to reach you all day," he said, his tone sharp. "Why aren't you picking up my calls? What's going on, Vanessa?" Vanessa stepped back, trying to close the door slightly, but Michael was already in the room. "I've been busy," she said, trying to maintain composure, though her heart was racing. "We have nothing to discuss." Michael stepped further into the room, his eyes locking onto hers, his voice dropping lower. "Don't lie to me. I know what's been going on." "You think I don't know?" He was growing impatient. "You don't just get to shut me out after everything." The words hung in the air, heavy and dangerous. Vanessa could feel the weight of her betrayal pressing down on her chest, and yet she still tried to push back, to deny everything she knew was true. "I don't want to talk about this, Michael," she said, her voice trembling slightly. But Michael wasn't done. He leaned closer, his presence filling the room like a storm cloud. "You owe me more than this. You promised, Vanessa. You said it was just one time, but here we are, and I'm still here, demanding answers." His voice hardened with each word. "I'm not going to let this go until you tell me the truth." Vanessa's face went pale. She could feel the walls closing in around her. Her mind raced, trying to find a way out, trying to keep the truth from spilling out. But Michael wasn't letting up. The air was thick with tension, each moment dragging on like an eternity. Finally, after a moment of silence, Michael's voice broke through again, his words a bombshell she hadn't been ready for. "The baby's mine, Vanessa." The world seemed to stop. Vanessa's stomach lurched, her knees weakening. She stumbled backward, her mind going blank. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. "No," she whispered, her voice breaking. "That's not possible. I
haven't been able to take my eyes."
interrupted her, his voice cold and unforgiving. "Don't deny it. I know the timing. I know what happened." He took a step forward, his presence overwhelming. "The timing says everything, Vanessa. You were with me, and now you're pregnant. Don't think I don't know the truth." Vanessa's thoughts were jumbled. She had kept this secret buried deep inside, but now it was out in the open. The truth that she had tried so desperately to keep hidden was finally spilling out. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, and she knew there was no turning back. "I'm sorry, Michael," she said, her voice trembling. "Please, don't tell Tyrone. Please, don't ruin everything." Her eyes were desperate, her hands shaking. But Michael wasn't moved by her pleas. "Don't think for a second I'm going to let this go," he said, his voice filled with cruel satisfaction. "You've got a choice now, Vanessa. Either you tell Tyrone the truth, or I will." His eyes narrowed. "I don't respect poor men, Vanessa. I don't respect the man you've chosen. I offered you more. I offered you a life you could only dream of, but you chose him. You chose this." The muffled sounds of the heated conversation filtered through the door as Tyrone, standing just outside, overheard every word. His heart dropped into his stomach as the truth began to unfold before him, shattering everything he had believed in. He had trusted his best friend. He had trusted the woman he was about to marry. And now, everything felt like a lie. He couldn't take it anymore. He stepped forward, his hand trembling as he gripped the doorknob. The sound of it turning seemed to echo in his ears as he threw open the door, stepping into the room. Vanessa's tear-streaked face was the first thing he saw. She froze, her eyes wide with shock, unable to even look at him. Michael, drunk with arrogance and confidence, turned his attention to Tyrone, who had just walked in. "What's going on here, Tyrone?" Michael sneered, his tone dripping with disdain. "You finally figured it out? Or did your wife tell you, or should I say, my girlfriend? Your wife and I have a little business to settle. The baby's mine, you know." The words hit Tyrone like a punch to the gut, and before he could say a word, the truth crashed down on him. "Is it true, Vanessa?" Tyrone asked, his voice barely a whisper, full of pain and disbelief. "Is this really happening? Did you sleep with him?" Vanessa, unable to meet his eyes, nodded, her hands trembling. "It was a mistake. I'm sorry, Tyrone," she whispered through her tears. "I never meant for this to happen. I didn't want it to be this way, but it's true. The baby is Michael's." Tyrone's world seemed to crumble around him. Everything he had worked for, everything he had believed in, had been ripped away in an instant. His best friend, his wife, the woman he loved, they had betrayed him in the worst possible way, and all he could do was stand there, shocked and broken, trying to piece together the shattering fragments of his heart. It was too late for apologies now. The damage was done. The room was thick with tension, the weight of betrayal hanging heavily in the air. Tyrone stood there, his fists clenched at his sides, trying to comprehend what had just been revealed. Vanessa, the woman he had loved and trusted, had betrayed him with his best friend. The truth was too much to bear, too much to process all at once. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't focus on anything but the searing pain in his chest. Michael, intoxicated by both his alcohol and his sense of superiority, was only fueling the fire. His words cut deep, sharper than any knife. "You're too poor to keep her, Tyrone," Michael sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. "You don't deserve her. You can't even give her the life she wants. She deserves better than this, better than you. You should be happy I planted a rich seed in her." Tyrone's rage boiled over. His hands shook with fury as he stepped toward Michael, his eyes flashing with hurt and anger. "You think you're better than me, Michael? You think money makes you better?" he spat, his voice rising. The pain of betrayal mingled with his anger, and before he could stop himself, he threw a punch.
What's your credit card debt balance? If it's
Was ready. His street-fighting experience had made him quick and lethal. He dodged the punch with ease, sidestepping Tyrone's desperate swing. Before Tyrone could react, Michael's hand shot out, grabbing him by the collar and slamming him into the wall. Tyrone struggled, but the strength that had once been a match for anyone in his neighborhood was no match for Michael's trained aggression. With a harsh shove, Michael sent Tyrone stumbling backward. Tyrone tried to regain his footing, his legs weak from the force of the push, but he was no match for Michael's strength. The alcohol coursing through Michael's veins only seemed to fuel his aggression. Michael lunged at Tyrone again, slamming him into the nearby bedside table. The sharp edge of the table struck Tyrone's temple with brutal force. He crumpled to the floor, his body slamming down with a sickening thud. Blood poured from the gash on his head, pooling around him. His breathing grew shallow, slow, and labored, his world fading to black. Vanessa, frozen in shock at the chaos unfolding before her, was paralyzed by the sight of Tyrone lying motionless on the floor. Her heart raced, her mind scrambled, unable to process what had just happened. She had never imagined that things would escalate to this point. She had hoped it would end with the truth being revealed, with the pain of betrayal being the worst of it. But now, everything had changed. Tyrone was hurt, badly. She could see the blood pooling around his head, his body limp and unmoving. Panic surged within her as the reality of the situation crashed down. "Tyrone," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Tyrone, please, wake up!" With trembling hands, she fumbled for her phone, dialing 911 with shaking fingers. "Please, help! He's hurt! He's bleeding! He's not moving!" she cried into the phone, her voice rising with desperation. The operator's calm voice barely registered as she tried to give instructions, but all Vanessa could focus on was Tyrone lying there, lifeless and still. "Please, you have to help him," Vanessa pleaded, her voice breaking. "Please, don't let him die." But before help could arrive, before the paramedics could reach them, Tyrone's breathing became slower, weaker. His body, so full of life moments before, seemed to slip away from him, as though he were fading into the darkness. The man she had promised her life to, her husband, was dying in front of her eyes, and she could do nothing to stop it. Vanessa dropped to her knees beside him, her hands trembling as she held his, begging him to hold on. "Tyrone, please, I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen. Please, don't leave me. Please!" Her sobs racked her body as she clung to him, but it was too late. Tyrone's breathing stopped. His hand went limp in hers, and a final, heartbreaking silence fell over the room. Vanessa sat there, in shock, unable to move or think. Michael stood off to the side, his expression one of both satisfaction and horror, as though he couldn't fully comprehend the magnitude of what had just occurred. But deep down, he knew. He knew he had pushed it too far. He had caused this. He had killed his best friend, all in the name of his own twisted desires. But it didn't matter now. Tyrone was gone, and Michael was left with the consequences of his actions. The sirens of the approaching ambulance grew louder, but for Vanessa, it was too late. The man she had loved, the man she had betrayed, was gone, and no amount of pleading or apology could bring him back. The wedding, the lies, the deception, everything had led to this one final, devastating moment. There would be no more happy memories, no more chance to make things right. Only a shattered future, a life ruined by betrayal and violence. And Vanessa was left to face the reality of what she had done. The man she had hurt, the life she had destroyed. And in the silence that followed, all that was left was regret. The chaos of the night was far from over. The paramedics arrived too late to save Tyrone. His life, taken by a blow fueled by rage and betrayal, left an emptiness that would never be filled. Vanessa sat in shock, numb and broken, as the police began their investigation. The crime scene was a blur of flashing lights, questions, and frantic activity. Michael, his earlier bravado now replaced with a cold realization of what he had done, was quickly arrested. His wealth, power, and connections made the situation more complicated than anyone could have imagined. Michael was used to controlling situations, to manipulating his way to the top. But this time, his money couldn't protect him from the reality of murder. The investigation, though swift, was riddled with complications. Michael's lawyers, highly skilled and well-connected, began to mount a defense, painting him as a man who had acted in the heat of the moment, an unintentional killer caught up in a dispute that had spiraled out of control. Yet no matter how much his wealth and influence tried to protect him, the evidence against him was undeniable. Tyrone's body bore the marks of violence, his head smashed against the bedside table, blood still staining the room. Witnesses, though few, had heard the heated argument, and Vanessa's testimony, though shaky and filled with grief, was damning. She had been there, had witnessed the confrontation. She couldn't escape the reality of her own complicity in the chain of events that led to Tyrone's death. For all his connections, Michael's arrest was only the beginning. He was charged with manslaughter, the defense arguing that the death had been unintentional, a tragic result of an argument that had gone too far. Still, the question lingered in the air.
Do you ever wonder how some people are making
A victim of his own rage, or was he the orchestrator of a much darker plan? The trial was long and intense, the courtroom a battleground where Michael's wealth collided with Vanessa's vulnerability. His lawyers painted Vanessa as a mere pawn in Michael's game, a woman manipulated by his power and charm. They argued that while Michael had crossed the line, his actions were the result of Vanessa's betrayal. Vanessa, on the other hand, was left to reckon with her own role in the tragedy. Her guilt was written on her face, in every word she spoke, as she tried to explain the unexplainable, the destruction of a life she had helped create. She had loved Tyrone, she truly had. But she had also been consumed by desires she couldn't control, and in the end, those desires had led to the death of the man she once vowed to marry. Michael was ultimately convicted of manslaughter, a sentence that shocked many. Despite his wealth and connections, he could not avoid the consequences of his actions. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison for the death of Tyrone, a sentence that, while lesser than it could have been, still left him facing the consequences of his violence. His once carefree life of luxury was replaced with the cold, unyielding reality of prison walls. As the legal proceedings unfolded, Vanessa was left to wrestle with the consequences of her choices. She had walked away from Tyrone's love and devoted herself to an illusion, a dream of wealth and status that had come at an unimaginable cost. But was she a victim of her own desires, a woman trapped in her own need for something more? Or was she complicit in the murder, an active participant in the web of lies that had spiraled into a violent end? In the quiet moments after the trial, when the world had turned its back on her, Vanessa could hardly recognize the woman she had become. The life she had once dreamed of, filled with luxury, attention, and status, had turned to dust. What was left was the wreckage of her choices, the consequences of her betrayal, and the empty space where Tyrone once stood. She had wanted to impress her friends, to live a life of envy, but in the end, nothing was worth the destruction she had caused. The cost had been far too high. Vanessa spent months in a spiral of remorse, visiting Tyrone's family, attending his funeral, each moment a reminder of the irreparable damage she had caused. She had not meant for things to turn out this way, but her actions, her desperation for more, had led her down a path she couldn't return from. She had betrayed Tyrone in the worst way possible, and now she had to live with the consequences. Tyrone's family was left to deal with the fallout. They mourned his loss, struggling to comprehend the betrayal that had cost him his life. They blamed Michael, of course. They blamed him for taking their son, their brother, from them in such a violent way. But they also blamed Vanessa. How could she have allowed it to happen? How could she have been so blind to the destruction she was courting? In the end, the question of morality lingered in the air. Was Vanessa a victim of her own desires, led astray by greed and ambition, or was she fully complicit in the destruction of Tyrone's life? No one could say for certain. But the consequences of her actions were clear: devastation, regret, and a life shattered beyond repair. As for Michael, his harsh reminder of the price of betrayal. His wealth could not shield him from the consequences of taking another man's life. And in the cold silence of his prison cell, he too would have to face the moral weight of his choices. The price he had paid for his ego, his desires, and his control over others. The story was one of broken lives, of shattered trust, and of the heavy cost of desires unrestrained. It was a reminder that the pursuit of wealth, status, and power often comes at a cost far greater than what anyone is willing to pay. And in the end, no one was left untouched. Sometimes, the people we trust the most are the ones who betray us. But in this case, it wasn't just a betrayal. It was a life lost. What do you think about the choices they made?